So let's get to what James Franklin had to say, because this is going to be a big, meaty conversation for Nate between the lines.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
I'm going to start with his second comment from yesterday. We're talking all about NIL and facilities during Between the Lines. We're going to start with his second comment when the follow-up to the first one about where are you with NIL. And you should go check out, I condensed these as much as I could. There's a lot of stuff we're not going to get to in what he said because it was like 5 minutes worth of him talking about this. But here is the first quote that we'll get to.
Yeah, we still got a ton of work to do. We started out the first couple years where we said we were going to teach student athletes how to be entrepreneurs. That was our NIL model. So we were 2 years behind everybody else. I think over the last year we've made significant progress. But if you give somebody a 2-year start in basically a 3-year model, I think it's pretty obvious. But what I've been doing is, instead of talking to you guys about it, we've been working to try to solve it, as much as we possibly can, by going out and educating the fan base and the donors about what we're truly competing against.
Nate, I feel like I could write a 1,500-word essay about him changing his pronoun from I to we when talking about trying to fix the problem. Yeah. Because that's really... he said a lot of stuff in there that we need to get to. But to me, the underlying current this whole time for the last 10 years has been, I have to try and fix it. I have to get... And now there's a we. There is a group of people working with him to take some of that off his plate so he can be the football coach again. Is that... Am I reading into that? But that's kind of what I've heard from you. Is that fair is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. For the most part, it's hard. I think that Pat Kraft still has some barriers, some political behind the scenes things that have to be navigated. Right? It's just a reality of the situation that he walked into. But I took the we comment more to be along the lines of, hey, it is everyone at Penn State, right? So whether that's James Franklin himself or Dan Kabbalah, the person the director kind of Penn State's in-house NIL efforts for football, Pat Kraft and his deputy athletic directors, like you name it, it is about getting people to understand what it looks like. The thing that is so interesting to me is James Franklin is holding his nose while saying some of this stuff, right? Like, I don't think he loves the notion of NIL and what it represents. He's as old school as it gets in terms of the value that existed for him as a college football player, riding the bus 5 hours each way for a game, eating a Snickers bar in the bus, right? Like on the bus. That was his experience. And it has been so impactful on his life that he went through that. He values all of those things. But also the bigger point of all of this is that's cool. That is so great for him in his life. That is not what exists today. It's not. Yep. It is not the model that is out there. And the way that Penn State positioned itself, as he said at the start, of trying to educate student athletes into becoming entrepreneurs was wildly different from the rest of the landscape.
I feel a little sheepish because when that came out, I remember thinking, good, like that should be a part of the model of education about not just handing kids a bunch of money, and I apologize for using the word kids, young men a bunch of money, and then just have fun, good luck with it. Like, but it was the handing the kids a bunch of money part that he's pointing out, like, no, we meant just education. Right. That's all we're going to be doing. And, at the beginning, I was like, good, this is the way it should be. But like, no, for competition, that was the wrong approach. So, how do you, and I think the way the question was phrased was, how do you, and can you dig out of a hole from facilities and NIL to get back to a competitive footing. And Penn State has been competitive despite all this, right? Like, we're talking about all these things, but they've still been competitive in almost every game where there hasn't been COVID or, 2021 outside of that.
Competitive on the field, but it's a question of when does that catch up to you? Well, right. If you don't have, and I talked about this all the time, but there is a little bit of a home team discount, right? You can get away with some stuff. You can not necessarily be at the upper end of NIL efforts and get away with it. It's just a question of how many areas are you trying to get away with versus how many areas are you trying to be the best at? Yep. And the reality for Penn State is NIL is something that they've tried to get away with. And I'm not in any way saying that is like an indictment that they haven't tried at all. It's simply a matter of the course that was chosen from the very first steps of this was counter to everything else that was happening nationally. Everybody else nationally, and I'm not saying everyone else, but a good majority nationally saw this as an opportunity to harness the power of their fan bases, their donors, and use it as a competitive edge. That's what people just fail to wrap their heads around how everything in college football is about that. The NCAA used to have rules preventing media guides from having all color pages because certain programs would go 500-page media guides, all color pages. They were so expensive that the rest of the model couldn't keep up, right? That was a media guide. It's so stupid, but that's what the NCAA was able to prohibit.
Yeah.
Like, that's just such a small representative sample size of what is happening nationally in NIL. It is, how can we possibly use our resources to our advantage to create a model that attracts players who are good at winning and playing football games to come to our program? If you want to educate them on top of that, that's great. Like that's totally fine. But that is not what the thrust was for everyone else. And Penn State is paying for it now by trying to catch up to that and by trying to reframe the conversation into, hey, everyone, this isn't bad. This is not a bad thing. This is not something to be afraid of. You are already donating financially to the football program at Penn State. We just need you to switch directions in where that money is going.
So I think to kind of sum everything up, what you just said and kind of what James, just flat out what James Franklin has said before, he put it in pretty blunt terms when asked about facilities, which also led into the NIL conversation.
The reality is, if you choose and want to compete at the very highest level, you guys have heard me say this before, you can't pick and choose what you're going to compete in. I think the other thing is, you guys remember, this discussion is very similar to a discussion we had 10 years ago when I was talking about facilities and people were looking at me like I was crazy. And the reality is the people that were aggressive on the front end with facilities, then obviously they're able to shift their focus to the new challenge. So the reality is, as you guys have heard me before, whether it's facility, whether it's staff size, whether it's alignment, whether it's NIL, whether it's all these things, if you truly want to compete at the highest level, then you can't say we're going to be competitive in these three areas and not in this one.
When he's talking about a decade ago, talking about infrastructure, it reminded me of have you seen the Internet Explorer meme of, the one where they're trying to chant and protest and all the web browsers are saying, what do we want? Faster internet. When do we want it? Now. And Internet Explorer goes, infrastructure. At the very, 3 seconds late, because it's always way behind. Having the conversation about infrastructure right now is a decade late in this conversation. And he's saying, to nutshell, you can't choose anymore. You have to be all in on all of it if you want to be Penn State. If you want to be the national program that you think you are that competes nationally, it's got to be all in, and it's not one or the other. Any other interesting things, any other interesting tidbits from yesterday that you want to talk about without sharing maybe something you're going to write later this week or preview something?
I always find it intriguing how the conversation is framed around an arms race as though the winners of arms races aren't ultimately the winners. Right? Like,
what do you mean?
Well, like,
I don't know if I know what you mean there.
It's an arms race is framed as this bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're just piling on to pile on, and that's the reason why you're doing it, is because you're in an arms race. It's counterproductive. You should be diverting resources to other things. But and again, I mean, I'm not taking this to war, but like,
right,
the winner of the arms race is the one who gets to decide what happens, right?
Right.
Like, they are the person, they are the thing that is in the dominant position. And so you might frame it as an arms race. That's a terrible thing, but college football is an arms race. The winners are winning the arms race. They're the ones who are pouring the resources. Georgia did it. Like, go back and look at how these programs built themselves. Look at what Nick Saban did at Alabama. Look at Texas. Well, Texas is a terrible example because they are spending and they aren't getting a return on it because they have no longevity. But that's a different conversation. The point is, if you look at the teams, if you look at the programs that are consistently there, not one-off, one-season stories, they all are dumping money, resources, time, energy, alignment into the product. And for Penn State to feel as though it doesn't have to do that, or not only that it doesn't have to do that, but that it shouldn't do that, well, then you can't be surprised by the results. Right? Because in a lot of ways, what Penn State has done thus far under James Franklin for the past 10 years is outperform where it is infrastructurally and resource wise.